All right, let's talk Dallas Cowboys. I'm Nick, and this is our daily Cowboys show, dealing with the aftermath ongoing after the Cowboys' Thursday night football loss. And boy, oh boy, do we got some spicy stuff for you guys today, including a rant coming from yours truly. I think you guys will really appreciate. But first, let's get things started as we always do. A little stat of the day, a little palate cleanser, if you will. Let me pull up this graphic here I saw on social media that I thought was very interesting. So there's a big discussion about Eberflus and what he's doing versus what he's not doing and what his goal is. And one of my points with Eberflus, the Cowboys defensive coordinator, of course, is he the guy delivering the right message, but is he the wrong messenger for that message? And I think this graphic on social media, courtesy of Football F-Ball Insights, was pretty insightful. So it's a plotting of the blitz rate versus the disguise coverage rate. And you can see the Dallas Cowboys have a very low blitz rate, a very low disguise coverage rate. They basically just line up and play. And what's interesting, if you look at that quadrant in the bottom left part of the graphic there, you've got two of the best defenses in football. I would say arguably three. You've got the Browns, which are a great defense, terrible offense, great defense. You've got the Colts, good defense, and the Texans, who are the best defense in football. I think that's a fact, and especially when you consider the issues they've had offensively. They haven't been playing complementary football season long. Their defense is crushing it. So Dallas is looking at, and I think Eberflus is looking at, kind of those three guys and those three strategies and saying, okay, that's what we want to emulate. But there's also a concerning element with the other teams in that quadrant as well. There's the Bengals, Washington, and the New York Giants, as well as the Jets. And those guys are bad defenses. Those are one of them, along with the Cowboys, some of the worst defenses in football. So the question there is Eberflus trying to implement something that gets him closer to the Houston Texans or closer to the Cincinnati Bengals? And that is the concern. And I do think he's actually heading in, from a general high-level perspective, trying to head in the right direction, because I've talked about this all season long. The reality is you can't play just an exotic, hyper-aggressive, really convoluted, blitz-happy defense, Wink Martindale defense. You can't do that, for consistent success in the NFL. It's not the early 2000s with like Jim Johnson in Philadelphia. Right, there's a reason that even with Micah Parsons, Mike Zimmer's defenses struggled last year, and he's a blitz-happy guy. Now you can sit there and say, well, the Cowboys had injuries and this, that, and the other thing, and there's some truth to that. But listen, they still surrendered 40 to Philadelphia, and Philadelphia was playing Kenny Pickett with their quarterback, right? They surrendered, a second half victory to Washington when Washington wasn't playing their guys anymore. The Buccaneers moved the football up and down. If it wasn't for a Jordan Lewis crazy one-handed interception and Deron Bland, ripping the ball out of Bucky Irving's hands, they would have given up 30 plus to the Buccaneers easily late last year. And that's with Micah Parsons. That's with a healthier secondary, right? They gave up a lot of yards and 27 points to Joe Burrow. Again, those are not like a huge indictment, but that's with, again, Parsons. That's with a healthier defense. That's at the end of the year, and that's with a blitz-happy, aggressive defense. So the reality is, even if you go down that route, it's not a guaranteed success. And over the long term, eventually it fizzles out. The question you have to ask yourself, and this is something I've asked a lot, and I think it's an open-ended question, is Eberflus the right messenger? D'Amico Ryans and his staff is the right messenger of the strategy for Houston. Lou Anarumo with the Indianapolis Colts, their new defensive coordinator, looks like the right messenger. The Cleveland Browns with Schwartz, that looks like the right messenger. Is Eberflus the right messenger with Dallas, or is he more like Anthony Golden in Cincinnati, right? Is he more like the Giants defensive coordinator got fired? I forget his name off the top of my head. And I think that's the question the Cowboys have to ask themselves. Is Eberflus, while I think he's delivering a good message, is he the right messenger for that message? Because his plan, his strategy, puts him in the same context as the Colts, Texans, and Browns, three of the top 8 defenses in football. But it also puts them in the context of some of the worst defenses in football, the Giants, Washington, and Cincinnati, along with the Cowboys, of course. So that leads to that very serious question that the Cowboys have to ask themselves. While the message may be right, or at least have a strong chance of being right, is Eberflus the right guy to deliver it? All right, let's get into the news here, guys. This is first report. I want to dig into this as much as I didn't want to dig into something like this. I think we have to. So this is courtesy of Todd Archer. There's 2 posts here. Beat reporter of ESPN, that's who Archer is, for those of you who aren't familiar. His first post was, Brian Schottenheimer is aware of the now deleted post George Pickens put on social media toward Richard Sherman and will speak to the receiver. I'm going to judge George on the body of work, and his body of work shows that he is an elite player, Schottenheimer said. Archer would also go on to report, and this everyone else has pretty much said the same thing at this point. Says Schottenheimer did not think effort was an issue for Pickens versus Detroit. None of us coached or played well enough. Okay, so I watched the game, as I'm sure a lot of you guys as well. It was Pickens' worst game as a Dallas Cowboy. Maybe week 1 against Philly is comparable, potentially. But I think at this point it was pretty clear not a great game from Pickens. I watched the game, and I've watched the film at this point. I haven't gotten deep in the weeds yet, but I looked at the All-22. And effort was not an issue with George Pickens. He delivered the same level of effort as he did against Kansas City when everyone was cheering him on, against Green Bay, against Philadelphia, last Sunday or a Sunday and a half ago at this point. So listen, it's to say effort was an issue for someone to say that. It's someone who's just not familiar with George Pickens, not familiar with his game, not familiar with how he's played. Now, I don't think he played well. Listen, the interception was a tough catch, but it's a contested catch. He had that face mask on that slant route, right? There was a lot of plays where he just didn't win the route, and I do think Pickens, it wasn't his best game. I think the Lions, came into the game sitting there saying, "Listen, we got to eliminate Pickens," and CeeDee Lamb then went off, and unfortunately, CeeDee Lamb would have had 250 yards receiving. They left him one-on-one, and he was dusting the Lions corners. They had no answers for him. He would have had a career day. And unfortunately, he got hurt, and the Flanoy stepped up, and he was having a career day. So it's one of those things. The Lions came to the game plan saying, listen, we are going to try and blitz and get after Prescott and just take away Pickens and live with what happens with anybody else. And they were getting absolutely eviscerated. The Cowboys came back in the game and were in the game in the fourth quarter despite having an all-pro receiver out. Right? They fell behind, and then CeeDee Lamb got hurt. That's just a godsend for the Detroit Lions. This is perfect. But because of the Lions' game plan taking away Pickens, the Cowboys could get back into the game. Flanoy being a big part of that. Ferguson making some big plays as well. But even Pickens, people talk about his effort. Remember, he had a 4th down conversion. And he fought and was scratching for every inch to get into the end zone. Ended up fumbling. Cowboys ended up recovering. Thank you, Tyler Smith. But effort was not an issue for Pickens. Anyone watching the game, you're like, man, that's not an effort thing. I know there's the clip going around on social media of a deep ball when it was 44-30 and 2 minutes to go where it looked like Pickens pulled up. But when you actually watch the film, it's one of those classic things where the receiver's looking for it over this shoulder. He's expecting the ball over here, and he adjusts to it over the other shoulder. And by the time he adjusts and turns, the ball lands. Now, could you make an argument maybe Pickens should have adjusted better or read it better or read the throw better? Sure. But that's a performance argument, which, listen, I'm all about critiquing players' performances. Players need to be critiqued for their performances. It's part of the business. It's one of the reasons they get paid millions of dollars, because they can go out there, get critiqued when they play well, get cheered when they play, or get critiqued when they play poorly, get cheered when they play well, and that's just part of the business. But effort's a whole nother thing. And let's get to the Richard Sherman discussion, because I think this is where I'm going to get on a very little aggressive rant here when it comes to Sherman. So Sherman obviously used his platform on Amazon Prime as an analyst commentator. Again, he's a former player. He knows cornerback play. He's obviously a great corner, one of the all-time greats, at least in recent NFL history. Part of an all-time great defense for sure in the Legion of Boom. So he knows cornerback play. He could tell you techniques. He could have told you what the Detroit Lions did schematically and technique-wise to take away Pickens. He could have talked about coverages. He could have talked about corner position. He could have given credit to the Lions corners for the jobs they did, or the Lions defenders, or the Lions defensive coordinator. He could have spent all his time talking about that. He knows that part of the game. But he didn't. Instead, he talked about Pickens is, not being interested. He's disengaged. Basically called out him for being an immature, for not being a professional. And that got me thinking. That's very interesting for Richard Sherman to say that, because this is a man that in 2021, in his 30s, at 33 years old, grown up, right, got arrested for DUI and about a litany of other charges. Not very mature, not very professional. Now, I will say this. I will not judge a man on his worst day. We all have bad days. I've had some. We all will. I'll have some. So even though that was not a good day at all for Sherman, I won't judge you against that. You made a mistake. You had a lapse. I'll let it be. I'm not going to tear you down for that. But then in 2025, you got arrested for suspicion of DUI again. So now we're seeing a real issue of maturity from Richard Sherman's perspective. This is a man that in 2021 had a terrible day, had issues with substances clearly, and just was you can go look up the situation with Sherman if you want. It was just a disaster situation, not good for him. And he was a grown-up. He was an adult. Wasn't some 20-some-year-old kid. Wasn't 24, 26, 27. I mean, we're talking 2021. We're talking, 5 years after Legion of Boom, right? Grown up, grown adult man, right? And he has a terrible, awful day. Okay, fine. I'll let that slide. And then 2025, arrested for DUI again. Suspicion of DUI again. Okay, this is a guy who's not mature. There's a saying, right? Don't throw stones if you live in a glass house. One of my favorite sayings, and, whether you're a Christian or not, but one of my favorite sayings from the Bible, it's from the Gospels, is that, when let those without sin cast the first stone, right? Basically, it's like, listen, man, unless you're perfect, don't be the one to tear down others. And Richard Sherman, and listen, none of us are perfect, but Richard Sherman's far from it. He is actually the example of a guy who is immature, who's unprofessional, who has so many flaws in the public part of his life that he should actually be critiqued. But we allow him in, and Amazon Prime and the media allows him in because, they want to look beyond it. They want to forgive him. They want to sit there and say, hey, the value you provide supposedly is higher than your maturity issues. And there's been other concerns and sort of other issues with Sherman's maturity back when he played. The famously yelling at Tom Brady after a game, sort of like, come on, that's Tom Brady, what are you doing? But again, he's a kid. I'll let that slide, right? He was, early 20s at the time. I'll let that slide, right? But this is a guy who clearly has had numerous, multiple that we know of, clashes with legal issues, serious legal issues. Immaturity of the highest order, lack of professionalism, not being a grown-up at all. And here he comes on essentially national TV, and he criticizes Pickens' effort, calling him an unprofessional, calling him immature. And then, of course, Pickens went on social media, and he had a post about him that he later took down, and was pretty detrimental to Sherman. But I will say this, Pickens is 100% correct, because what Sherman did is two things. And I talked about this before. One, it's cowardly. It's not what men do. You don't go on TV, you don't go on a platform and hide behind a corporate logo, Amazon in this case, and criticize another man's effort, criticize another man's heart. You can't read his mind. Richard Sherman, unless he's the one human being that can read minds, he's not a guy that's capable of reading minds. He doesn't know what's in Pickens' heart. None of us do. We can't look at and say, oh, he's not trying hard. I'll look at the film, look like the same kind of game Pickens has been playing all season long, just was a bad game for him. Lamb had a bad game against Philly a couple, week or so ago at this point. It happens. You have bad games. Star players have bad games. It happens. The reality is, for Sherman to suddenly say, oh, I know I can look into his mind and say he just doesn't want to play. Just didn't care. No effort. Totally inexcusable from Sherman's perspective. And the fact that Amazon and the announcers let it slide on the broadcast, to me, shows the cowardice of the other men on that show. That's cowardice. That's cowardice from Sherman. That's not what men do. Listen, if you have a problem with what another man is doing effort-wise in the profession, you can bring that, privately. You can have a public discussion, but it's face-to-face. It's man-to-man. You're hiding behind a corporate logo, Richard Sherman. That's not what men do. That's what cowards do. Because Pickens can't strike back now because he has no defense. Now, because if he strikes back, then it becomes a big whole thing, right? And then again, Sherman hides behind this whole veneer of, oh, yeah, he's an immature kid. See, I told you. No, Richard Sherman, you are unprofessional. You are a man in your late 30s that doesn't know how to take care of yourself. You can't measure yourself. You can't control yourself. You've proven that your entire career, right? That's who you were every step of the way. And people said part of your passion and energy, and as a player, I took it. But off the field, you have become a total mess, and it's undeniable at this point. And this is a huge problem with what we do when it comes to how we treat players. We allow people that have numerous flaws, and I've got no problem with former players looking at the game and measuring it from an X's and O's perspective, from a technique perspective. That's what I want. But I have a huge problem with very flawed human beings, and we all are very flawed, undeniably so, sitting there and taking a high horse position as if Richard Sherman is the just perfect exemplar of maturity and moral values and leadership and professionalism, when in every step of his life in a professional capacity, he has failed in that endeavor. It's so freaking public, guys. Richard Sherman is the exact opposite. When you ask anybody in the NFL, they say, hey, who do you want to be publicly professionally? Richard Sherman is not even close to the first name, not even close to the 10th name, not even close to the 100th name, not even close to the 1,000th name that comes up. You notice no one else on that Prime cast or any other cast came out and criticized Pickens' effort. At least not the way Sherman did. They may have criticized his performance. They may have criticized the Cowboys, which of course is fine. But Richard Sherman, a guy who, again, just is such a flawed example, to put it mildly, of maturity and professionalism, for him to come out and do that, I think Pickens took it easy on him. To me, if I was Pickens, I would have called Sherman and says, listen, maybe you and I need to have a frank discussion, man on man. And of course, Sherman wouldn't do that because, in my opinion, he's not a man. Because men don't do that. You don't go on TV and hide behind a corporate logo to criticize another man's effort and heart. Are you kidding me? Are you kidding me? Is that what we've come to today? Listen, if you've got a problem with someone is doing, listen, you critique his performance, analyze his technique, that's fine. But if you're going to criticize another man's heart, what's in his mind, which you have no way of knowing, you're not a mind reader. None of us are. And you're going to go on and hide behind, just the Amazon logo to do that? It's embarrassing. It's humiliating. For Richard Sherman, this is again another example of lack of professionalism and maturity on his part, especially when the fact that he said that right after the game. It's another thing if he would have done some journalism, and that's saying he would have asked Schottenheimer, or if he would have gotten behind the scenes and said, hey, what do people say about Pickens' effort? Or what if he would have asked George Pickens himself? He said, hey, Pickens, what'd you think of your effort? And you said, it wasn't my best effort. That would have been fair, but he didn't do journalism, did he? He didn't do analysis, did he? He hid behind a corporate logo like a coward, not like men don't do that, to challenge another man knowing that Pickens couldn't respond because there's nothing Pickens can do. He loses no matter what. To me, this is just an indictment of Richard Sherman. And listen, I have been every step of Pickens this season, not very, very far from the biggest Pickens supporter. I've been saying he's having a great year, but this is the aberration year, right? We haven't seen it productivity-wise on the field in terms of his performance, anything close to this in his NFL career. And I think him and CeeDee Lamb work phenomenally well together. It's a together thing. Lamb, Pickens, Ferguson, Shoddy in the offense, right? It all works well together. But I think at this moment right now, and that's on the field, 100%, I think this is the most supportive I'm probably ever going to be of Pickens because he was put in a lose-lose situation. Because when you look at the film and you look at the footage, and Pickens said this after the game, he said, listen, Flo went off, Illinois went off for 100 yards. Listen, the defense, they'll take you away. Other guys go off and make plays. That's exactly what happened. They had two other receivers get 100 yards. Ferguson was highly productive. Dak Prescott threw for like 376 yards, carved up Detroit, right? If it wasn't for that terrible call on Ferguson on third down, they scored 34 points. They still dropped 30, right? And that's with, turnovers. They would have scored more points. They had another turnover late in the game in kind of garbage time, of course. And then they obviously had, if you look at the fumble with Ferguson, and then you look at the interception that was deflected off Pickens, which is Pickens' fault, in my opinion, partly Pickens' fault, they probably would have scored even more. The reality is, and then you had the pass interference, Pickens-Ferguson. Boy, I mean, you go back through this game, now the quick sidetrack here, how many opportunities Dallas had on offense to score just a million more, and everything went against them. Ferguson, no call. You've got the DPI to Pickens that gets offset because of a Ferguson penalty. You have a fumble by Ferguson that gives the Lions great field position, right? You've got, the CeeDee Lamb injury, when he's just going off, when he's literally becoming unguardable. You've got a numerous amount of instances where it's just like, man, like the Cowboys are this, that ticky-tack pick play call. I don't like that call, by the way. Also on Pickens, I think that was a flop by Detroit, 100%. I had a film film review video I put out yesterday, kind of breaking it down. But the reality is, even with all those flukes that break things that went against Dallas, they still scored 30 points. Why? Because everyone was trying to mitigate Pickens and get and just eliminate number 3 from the game plan. Lamb goes off, Ferguson productive. Illinois has the best game of his career in terms of with the Dallas Cowboys. Although you can make the case maybe the Jets game earlier. If it's not his best game, it's his second best game. So Pickens is 100% correct. Everything he was 100% correct. And I think this is a real problem with people like Richard Sherman. And it's this generation, it's my generation, right? Sherman and I are roughly the same age. And it's a problem with my generation. I'll admit that there is this weird belief set with people my age that they look at themselves and they see their own mistakes and transgressions and say, oh, that's nothing. But I'm going to ignore that and put that to the side because I am the own arbiter of morality, professionalism, maturity, and I'm going to impose what I think it needs to be on everybody else. Don't throw stones if you live in glass houses. Let those without sin cast the first stone. Those are two important lessons we've had for literally millennia. And it seems with Richard Sherman, he's lost the plot there on both of those issues. Credit to the Cowboys here for sticking with George Pickens. All right, that's my rant, guys. That's a long rant. I know it's probably a lot longer than you care to hear. Let's get more into the news. John Machota writes, Cowboys owner Jerry Jones on 105.3 The Fan on George Pickens' effort last night. He didn't have the game he's been having, but effort, I would be very careful with him going there. Cowboys sticking with Pickens. And, of course, this is exactly what the film says. Shoddy says this. The players said this. And, of course, Jerry Jones says this, right? Because, of course, when you watch the film, effort wasn't the issue. Execution was very different. And it's obvious to anyone who thinks about this for more than 2 seconds. Obvious. Even during the game, Pickens had some high effort plays. So, again, credit to the Cowboys for sticking with George Pickens. Shoddy saying, listen, it's an execution thing. We didn't coach or play well enough. Not an effort thing at all. We're going to judge him by his body of work, and he's a phenomenal player. Jerry Jones says, listen, not his best game, but I'd be very careful about judging a man's effort. And Jerry Jones is 100% correct. All right, next report here, something that will got me a little annoyed when I first heard it. Joseph Hoyt reports Brian Scheinheimer expects the snap count distribution between Kenneth Murray and Logan Wilson to likely remain the same. And there's the snap counts listed below against the Lions. Overshown gets the vast majority of them, which would make sense. Then Murray, then Wilson, and Leah found Shamar James in certain situations and certain packages in the mix as well. Murray with a touch more than Wilson, but roughly, I mean, it's close enough to be the same. I mean, that could just be matchup personnel situations there. And Shoddy came publicly and said, listen, I like what Murray's doing. You know, we're going to keep the snap count the same. And, of course, Murray's been absolutely atrociously awful. I think that's undeniable. So a lot of people, myself included, when I heard this report, I'm like, you've got to be kidding me. What the heck is going on? And I stopped to think about it for a second, and then I realized something that just popped into my head when I was thinking about this last night and this morning when I was preparing. It's quite possible that in practice and in the games, there literally is no one better than Kenneth Murray, outside of Overshown, of course. Shamar James, we've seen him this year. He struggled. And in the pass game, he's effective. He's a hustler. He's a sure tackler. But, in the run game and every down linebacker, he had a good start, but then just got totally, when the Broncos and the Panthers attacked Shamar James, and he just struggled. I think he's got a bright future, but it's a different world than what he did when it's in coverage situation, and he can play on 3rd and 15 with a good pass rush. Good against the Jets, did some good things against Washington. Not all good against Washington, but good things overall. But after that, it's been a struggle for Shamar James. Then you look at, of course, Logan Wilson. He's new to the team, trying to figure things out. But you watch what he does on film, it's a lot of, it's not so great, right? And I think right now, probably what I'm guessing is going on in practice, it's a lot of not so good with Logan Wilson. And I think right now this is basically a statement from Shoddy saying, listen, none of these guys are playing well. Now, of course, he has to say publicly we like Kenneth Murray. You have to say you like what the players are doing. Any coach that doesn't say that, I think, is hurting their team. If you call out an individual and say he's playing poorly, unless he's a superstar, like stars are different. You're like, yeah, it wasn't CeeDee Lamb's best game, but we know he's a star. He'll be great. Kind of like you do with Pickens, right? Yeah, it wasn't his best game, but he's a star. He's great. We love him. But if he's not a star, listen, it's the classic managerial tactic, right? You in public, you praise him up, say good things, and you criticize in private, right? It's classic managerial 101, which is what Shoddy's implemented here, which is 100% the right thing to do. As a fan, it's frustrating because you're like, listen, we all know Kenneth Murray is struggling, really, really struggling. But the reality is, and I think this is just the truth, there may not be anybody playing better. Wilson isn't playing better than Kenneth Murray. Shamar James isn't playing better than Kenneth Murray. Obviously, Overshown is, and Overshown is playing more snaps than both those guys by a large margin. He probably will continue to play more. But the reality is, I mean, as frustrating as that is to say, the linebacker position for Dallas, they added Logan Wilson. At this point, he may not have been an upgrade. And listen, the Quinnen Williams trade was a hit. The Pickens trade was a hit. The Murray trade was a miss. And right now, it looks like the Logan Wilson trade, looks like it was a miss too. And listen, that's going to happen, right? You're going to have hits, you're going to have misses, and we'll see what time will tell. Maybe Wilson gets more comfortable and plays better. But I think this is a statement from Shoddy. I think this is an attack on Logan Wilson. Not an attack, but like a declaration saying, listen, bro, you came in here to try and be an upgrade, and what you're doing on film and practice and what you're doing on the game ain't an upgrade. We're sticking with a guy that's struggling, going to get a lot of snaps too, because you're not playing well. I think that's what this is. I think there's no one actually playing better in practice and on film during the games than Kenneth Murray. Murray's playing poorly, 100%. But I don't think Shoddy and the defensive staff in general, and this is Schottenheimer saying this isn't Eberflus, this isn't anybody else, this isn't Jerry Jones, this is Shoddy saying, listen, I put on the tape, and Kenneth Murray is doing some good things, which is, I think, code for Logan Wilson ain't doing better.
And I think until Logan Wilson proves he's playing better, I think he's going to stick with this mix. I think this is basically a competition at this point between Murray and Wilson for reps the rest of the season. And I also think it's an audition for Wilson because the Cowboys have 2 first-round picks. And they may be tempted to go linebacker with one of those first-round picks before it's all said and done. And Wilson could find himself with a Cowboys career that ends rather abruptly if he doesn't get this turned around. Shoddy cut Kyle Elam. The Cowboys traded for Elam. They cut Elam, right? He'll make a move that, even though the Cowboys added a veteran player, he'll bench you. He'll get rid of you. He's done that multiple times already. I don't think he'll be afraid to move off of Logan Wilson at the offseason if he doesn't improve. And based on his statement here, I don't think he's very happy with what Logan Wilson is doing. I think that's just fair. All right, this next report, also from Joseph Hoyt, talking about Chavon Revel Jr. Cowboys owner Jerry Jones on the young corner. I saw a guy in his 4th NFL game with fairly limited live practice under his belt. That's exactly what I saw, but I sure am excited about him as a player for the future. He'll learn from last night. So one thing I will say about Jerry Jones is he is outstanding in public. Again, when it comes to these players, this is the perfect message to say. Asked about Revel, who had a worst game of his career, small sample size, tough opponent on the road, big game, and he struggled in just about everything, right? Just had a bad game. Now, I think he competed. I think he, tried his best to tackle and fit in. I think his effort is a lot better. Like some of the criticisms of run fits, I'll say it like that, in terms of, because I shouldn't say effort, but run fits, some of the criticisms of Elam and sometimes Diggs is like run fits aren't great. I think Revel is doing a better job of those run fits in a lot of situations than those guys did earlier this year. So, there is some good things there. I think he just really struggled overall. I think that's clear. You look at the film, you look at just the broadcast, just bad day from Revel, for sure. All that being said, I love Jerry Jones's comments here because this is perfect. Listen, this is 4th game. Right? This is 4th NFL game. This is a guy who literally didn't go through training camp, right? Went through 3 weeks of practice coming off the, IR. So we're talking about a guy that's gone through NFL practices for 2 months, essentially. And one terrible game against a tough opponent, good quarterback on the road, good receivers, explosive receivers. Listen, man, kudos to you for battling. I think the future with Revel is very bright. There has been a discourse of people talking about Eberflus refusing to use Revel in his skill set, saying, listen, he's good at press man. Why are they using him in, more off coverage zone in a situation like that? And here's my point. This is something I've talked about all the time. There has never been a successful organization ever, NFL franchise, business, charity, whatever, government, that has tailored everything they do to specific people in that organization. So if you have a talented salesman, for example, it's different if you have special, right? If you've got transcendent, if you've got an all-pro, if you've got one of the greatest of all time, if you've got Myles Garrett, for example, okay, you tailor your defense around them. You change your strategy to match him because he's a special player in every facet. You could make an argument Micah Parsons is close to that level. Dallas doesn't have anybody on that defense. Revel's not at that level, not even close. Maybe he will at some point, but certainly not right now. But you do not tailor your organization, your systems, your processes to a talented young addition, a talented young member. You don't. That's not how it works. That's not what successful organizations do. People clamoring and clawing for, well, Revel should play more press man. No. Now, you can make an argument that Eberflus's schemes and coverages are wrong and should not be used. That's fair. But that's a separate argument. You don't put your team in situations where players only do the things that they're supposedly good at. And you implement a system. You implement a process. Systems win. There's a reason we talk about the Belichick system, the Landry system, the Bill Walsh system, the Paul Brown system. Systems win in the NFL. That's a fact. Undeniably so. Why did the Mike McCarthy era end and sort of, decay? Because there was no system. It was rolling out the footballs and playing. There was no culture. There was no franchise. There was no program, or whatever you want to call it. The Cowboys are trying to implement a system. If it's the wrong system and the wrong messenger in that system, I am up for that debate 100%. And I can see both sides of it now, certainly, for sure. But the reality is, you're trying to implement a system. If you tailor every little element of your game plan and strategy to what each individual player does well or doesn't do well, what are you doing? You're screwing your system. Hey, it may make you look good in one game. May help you. Good job. It may help you beat the Detroit Lions. Maybe you still would have lost, but maybe you would have played better. Hey, good job. You lost to the Lions 34-30 instead of 44-30. but Rev will look better. But you failed to implement a system. In the long run, you'll lose. You'll lose. Jason Garrett failed to implement a system. Wade Phillips did. What happened in the long run, guys? There's also another discussion here when it comes to Revel and the Dallas Cowboys and how you use certain players and things of that nature. And I do want to bring up an important point here when it comes to Revel. People say it was a good press man corner with his wingspan. I have a firm belief with football players. If you're a good football player, you're good at football. If you're not a good football player, then you're not good. So if you're good at, say, being a press man corner, but man, he's not a zone corner, then to me, you're just not a good football player. That's just a fact, right? CeeDee Lamb is good in the slot. CeeDee Lamb is good out wide. CeeDee Lamb is good in bunch. CeeDee Lamb is good in isolation. CeeDee Lamb is good with short throws and slants and curls. He's good in double moves. He's good in 50-50 balls. He's good at beating people deep with speed, right? He's good on speed sweeps. CeeDee Lamb's good at football. That's just a fact. Dak Prescott is good on the slants, good on the verticals, good on the seams, good on the out routes, good on the curls, good on play action, good on drop back. You're good if you're good. If you're only good at certain things, you're not a good football player. And I'm not saying Revel's only good at certain things. I think he'll be good at a lot. But just because, like, oh, you're good at this one thing. If you're only good at this one thing, you're not a good football player. So when I played collegiately, the best football players, so we ran a triple option offense in college, right? And a lot of the offensive linemen, right, that were the best ones, because triple option is obviously a different offensive players in general, but certainly offensive linemen, I noticed this. The best offensive linemen we had were guys that did not run anything remotely close to triple option offenses in high school. Not even close. They were spread, typical zone stuff. They weren't used to it at all. No experience. They came to school, didn't know anything about triple option football. And they would go on to be, all conference, a few all-American guys mixed in there as well. Why? Because they were good at football. If you're good at football, it doesn't matter the scheme. Anyone telling you different, oh, you got to match the scheme to the player. If you have to do that, then he's not good at football. Then you should replace the player. That's just a fact. All right, let's get into this next report here. Good post here from Skywalker Steel. When Zimmer realized what a weapon Overshown was as a blitzer, he blitzed them 51 times in 2024. Demo had 5 sacks, 8 tackles for loss, 5 quarterback hits, 20 pressures. In 2025, Demo has only blitzed twice per PFR since returning 4 games. 0 sacks, 1 tackle for loss, 0 QB hits, 0 pressures. With the film from 2024 as proof, it's a little baffling he hasn't been used as a weapon in that manner, given you don't have a consistent dynamic edge rusher anymore and could use the pass rush juice. I do think this is a little surprising because it's not like the Cowboys don't blitz a lot, but they don't blitz. They'll still blitz, for example, Kenneth Murray. They'll still blitz Shamar James. Sometimes they'll blitz Leo Fowl off the edge. So it's almost like they evenly distribute the blitzes, whereas Overshown's a defensive blitzing weapon. So to me, if you're going to blitz a linebacker, if you're in a game and Overshown's in the game, I would blitz Overshown, right? That would make more sense to me. So this is one of my criticisms of, of Eberflus specifically is even in his scheme, his system, the way he manages and calls the game. I think his overall system and the message is good. But it goes back to my message and messenger argument is, listen, if you're going to call a linebacker blitz, let's get Overshown being the blitzer. I think that makes sense to me, right? Why are you going to call, if you're going to try to dial up a blitz in the situation, why is Shamar James going to be the guy? Or why is Leo Fowl going to be the guy? Not that you don't do that, but I'm just saying, if there's a guy who's of those 3 guys, of the 4, Wilson, Murray, throw out anybody, who's a better blitzer, who's a better playmaker? That's Overshown. And to me, that's a problem with Eberflus, is that even when he gets into the scheme, and he's not a big blitzer, but if you are going to be a situational blitzer, do it with your best guy. And I think that is the problem with Eberflus here, is that he kind of just says, okay, the weak side linebacker in this situation blitzes. When we call this structure in this defense, I'm going to make this call. And and I get that approach, but there is also, and Shadi does a great job with this on the offensive side of the football, implementing a scheme and a strategy, but he also calls it not just the plays, but for the players as well. And he's mentioned this. And I think you got to do that on defense as well. The best defensive minds do this, right? They have their scheme, they have their strategy, but they also, when it's for those big calls, those big blitzes, those big disguises that do occur, they do it with certain players in mind. And I do think not utilizing Overshown to that extent is a huge flaw with Eberflus. He basically treats every single player scheme-wise as sort of just they're all sort of just normal people. I was going to say bland, but obviously with Deron Bland, that kind of makes it a little confusing. I think he also treats them as sort of like widgets. Like listen, they're all kind of the same. But that's not the case. Overshown has a special element to him. And I think you should, if you're going to call those disguises, if you're going to call those blitzes, have like an Overshown mindset of, okay, we want to make sure they're tailored for zero. Not necessarily for Shamar James, not necessarily for Leah Fowl, not necessarily for Kenneth Murray or Logan Wilson, for Overshown. If you're going to call it blitzes, make sure it's with Overshown involved. I think that's what makes sense to me. The lack of, working with the linebacker core to figure out, okay, when and how we're going to call blitzes is tailored not to the player, but just to whoever's lined up, wherever they're lined up. I'm just not a fan of that. Listen, I've got no problem with a high-level message, but when it's time to call those blitzes or those schemes, do it with your star players in mind. And I think that's been a big flaw with Eberflus, and I think it's one of the real issues I have with them as their DC going forward. All right, get some injury updates here. Patrick Walker, a voice of the Star, writes, CeeDee Lamb has had a good day today, but is in concussion protocol per Shoddy, who also said hopes the next couple of days should help. Jadeveon Clowney will be ready to go against Minnesota, barring any setbacks, also per Shoddy. The team is in a mini-bye. Jerry Jones has come out also and said Guyton, based on his opinion, should be ready to go as well, which seems likely. So good news on CeeDee Lamb. There's reports after the game that he's like, yeah, he's fine, boarded the plane without any issues. Now, he's in concussion protocol, so that's going to be a multi-step process, and they need to be 100% safe and careful with that, undeniably so. But it's good that he had a good day, right? When I watched it live, I think it was like scary for a second, but I didn't really think concussion at first. I mean, people talk about the posturing position, but I thought it was a guy who landed awkwardly on his shoulder more than anything else, and I think they're just being overly cautious, as they should be. And of course, it's good news and he had a good day. We'll see what happens over the next few days. Jadeveon Clowney being ready to go, getting him back, obviously big help to the defense. They missed him big time. Lack of a consistent edge rush really hurt them against the Detroit Lions. And of course, getting Guyton back would also be helpful as well. All right, this next report here was something I noted. So Brian Branch suffered an Achilles injury. He's out for the rest of the season against the Dallas Cowboys. Amon-Ra St. Brown famously played through what most people thought was a severe ankle sprain. He then mentioned after the game that he felt okay, but he was going to feel bad on Friday because he had taken some medicine. The implication, of course, with St. Brown is that he basically was hopped up on painkillers to the extreme, whether it was, however he got them, whether he took the shot or whatever, right? That seemed to be what he didn't directly say that, but that was the implication for sure. And Brian Branch had been dealing with injuries. He'd been limited in practice all week, and they basically said, no, we're going to play him. And this is the point I made. Shiny with Diggs, Clownies, and others all season. Don't rush it. Don't want to make a mild injury worse. Brian Branch had a mild injury. Dan Campbell, we bite kneecaps. I'll play through the pain. St. Brown did that, and he took painkillers to get through. And now you have Brian Branch's Achilles injury. He's out for the season and will be out for probably most of next season, right? It's December. An Achilles injury. I mean, I hope Brian Branch has a great recovery, but I don't know when he's going to come back. I mean, that could be 12 months. I mean, maybe he'll come back by week 6 or something next year. I hope he does because he's a good player. I'm a big fan of Brian Branch. But the reality is it speaks to the difference in mentality. It's short-term thinking all the time. That's why the Lions are a big fourth down team, big fake team, and all that kind of stuff, because everything they do is short-term thinking, right? And there's nothing wrong with that, but eventually it comes to a head. And people in Detroit wonder, gosh, why do we get so beat up at the end of the year? Why do we have so many injuries last year? Why do we have so many injuries this year? Because you pull everybody. Your coach is just this guy. His mentality, his cultures, everybody got through the pain. Everyone figured out to win this week. Well, guess what? You're outside the playoffs looking in right now. You're going to be a wild card team most likely. You're going on the road. We all know Jared Goff and that offense is great at home. Amazing at home. Right? Top 3 offense at home. On the road, much closer to middle of the pack. Right? That's what we've seen all season for the Lions. Right? Still a talented bunch, but when you get them out the dome, Goff is a little bit more flawed for sure. The reality is now they're going to have a worse defense. They got injuries. They're technically still outside the playoffs looking in. And because they forced everybody back, because they took short-term thinking to the extreme, compare that with Dallas, right? Didn't rush Diggs, didn't rush Clowney, take it easy, didn't rush Guyton, right? And they've been doing this all season long with a bunch of guys, right? The reality is it's a different approach. It's short-term thinking versus long-term thinking. And even if you're in a championship window, you never want to rush players back, because the moment you think short-term to the extreme, eventually it will bite you. And we saw with the Brian Branch injury, Amon-Ra St. Brown, what a machine battling through that. But based on the reporting, it seems like he was basically heavily on painkillers to get him through the game. And listen, that'll fight your way through, a few games. As anyone will tell you, over the long term, that's not good for a player's health. It just isn't. All right, let's get into the comment section here. Get started with It's Juma 32-31. I don't think I'm as upset with Shoddy as you for Murray, but you're not wrong that it's time to put the foot down and bench him. But Rebel just had his welcome to the league moment. The Lions have an extremely talented offense, and we knew this could have happened. The safeties were awful, and Reddy Stewart was getting cooked all day. Very little edge pressure, and Goff had all the time in the world. Offensively, they keep starting slow and putting the ball on the ground, and that can't happen. Our line play was terrible. I watched Tyler Smith get driven back 4 yards in a DAC, steal as a cut. The game was lost before the refs got involved. He also said draft related. I agree the defense needs the most help. But yeah, Jeremiah Love is a Zeke Gibbs level player in my opinion. He's a receiving threat that can turn into a 40-plus TD. But Reese is a linebacker edge who can actually play both positions extremely well. Downs is the best safety in the draft, and Styles is another highly rated linebacker who could pass rush. Any of them would most likely be starters on this team. Yeah, I think, I don't hate Jeremiah Love, but I think 2 first-round picks got to go defense. At this point, it feels like edge and linebacker, to be totally honest. And I know there's a lot of concerns about the safety position, but I think the linebacker play is just so bad with Murray and with Wilson. It almost seems, and talked about not benching Murray. I think at this point, I think Logan Wilson's just playing very poorly in practice. And if you look at the games with Wilson, it's not like he's been lighting it up either. Seriously, name one play Logan Wilson has made in the 4 games since he's become a Dallas Cowboy. Like one good play, one big play. It just isn't there. Right, and if you look at the film, I think Murray's been playing worse than Wilson, but there's no reason for Logan Wilson to leapfrog Kenneth Murray at this point, right? In terms of like, hey, Wilson's so much better. As great as the Quinnen Williams trade was, I think the Logan Wilson trade just doesn't seem to work out yet. But I do think they may have to go linebacker and edge with their 2 first-round picks, and may have to figure out safety position. I think one of the reasons I think they're playing Marquise Bell so much is because of that. Like, listen. Can this guy play? And I don't think Marquise Bell can play, to be totally honest. But they're playing him a lot just to see, listen, can we figure out if this guy's a player or not? David Dobbins, 5887, writes, Pickens has a short time to earn that money, and the game puts him in a hole. Kenneth Murray should be in prison for embezzlement. That's funny. Short fields for Detroit lost this game. The special team coach should be fired today. Everyone who fumbled or caused an interception can take the first few series off starting next game. GP might be 3. How about the effing team trying to score for a change while in the red zone? The stats don't lie. We did this to ourselves. Shoddy has new coachitis. I still think he's top tier. Eberflus is starting to wear on me, and I've been a huge supporter. The whole team can't seem to evaluate their own talent. Yeah, the slow starts on offense. I think that's very bizarre to me that happens. I can't quite figure out why. Right, the only game where they started very efficiently was actually Week 1 against Philadelphia, and I think a lot of it is because Shoddy is setting up the play-action game and setting up the big passing game. So he's setting up the runs and the short throws, and he's basically baiting the defense. He's like, play the run, play the run, play the run, play the short throw. Oh, Pickens Lamb over the top. We're gonna cook you. I think that's what he's doing, right? Which isn't the worst thing in the world, to be totally honest, but it does make for an ugly start to the game. And when your defense also starts slow, it creates a bad situation. The Cowboys have trailed in every game this year. In 13 games, they trailed every single game, right? They trailed by double digits, I think, in 6 of them, right? These slow starts are just a killer. And I understand it's worked out well for Shoddy in the offense in terms of setting everything up. And that is important, right? You got to have an approach to it. But boy, you gotta do better to start the game offensively. You just gotta find a way to not be in a hole all the time, because it just makes your margin for error smaller. It makes every fumble, every missed opportunity just that much more of an issue. Because then you dig yourself into a deep hole that is really hard to climb out against good teams. They were able to do it against Philadelphia. They did it against Kansas City, a much lighter hole. Just couldn't quite get there with the Detroit Lions because the Cowboys could get stops against the Lions. They couldn't. Right, and part of it though is you're in a hole, right? You're down 27-16 when you go back on the field defensively, right? And that's not a great position to be in. But at that point, like, listen, it's harder to get stops sometimes. Get good offense on the road, it's hard. Defense has struggled for sure, but you can't put them in that position all the time. They got stops against the Chiefs too, right? It was 14-7, 14-10, 17-14. The Cowboys defense, while not perfect in Kansas City, at least got stops after a slow start to get the offense a chance to go up eventually by 10. The reality is you can't rely on that every single game to have a slow start and say, okay, defense, get us some stops. They played the Raiders, got a lot of stops against the Raiders, but the Raiders are a bad offense, guys. Right? You can't do that every game. You got to go up 7-0, 10-0, 7-3, 10-3 from your perspective, right? In order to actually, put yourself in a good spot. But thank you, as always, for shouting out the channel with like, comment, subscribe, hype. It means a lot to me. I really appreciate that, David. Thank you, as always. This next comment is from Delta704. Wondering how you feel about keeping Flus for continuity's sake at this point. Should we go out and get the best DC and special teams coach possible this offseason? Yeah, a lot of people hating on Sorensen, the special teams coach. I'm not so down on Sorensen. Listen, you're going to have a bad game. It's going to happen. It's frustrating that, one of the things that stinks when you have a bad game and, it's the rains it pours effect, right? Your defense is having a rough game. Offense has turnovers. Lamb gets hurt. And then your special teams is letting you down in the kick coverage game. You're like, boy, in a game where you're like, okay, this is where we needed Turpin to step up. This is where we need the kick coverage to kind of give us an advantage. Neither of those are happening. Turpin's having an awful season. Is that Sorensen? I don't think that's fair at this point. I mean, I'm not an anti-Sorensen guy. It's the kick coverage for the most part of the season has been more than fine. Hasn't been perfect, but it's been fine. I think they just had a disaster game. I'm not ready to fire Sorensen yet at all. Listen, they had Bones Fossil, who I thought got cute every other day with the fake punts and some screwy block punts that always would put them in bad situations. How many times we give up a dumb penalty or do something stupid on special teams that would put the team in a terrible position with Fossil? I hated Fossil as a special teams coach. Just my opinion, just got way too cute. I like a lot of what Sorensen's doing. Remember, they blocked 2 kicks this year, right? They blocked 3 kicks, actually, excuse me. They blocked 3 kicks this year. It's not bad, right? Arizona, Green Bay, and of course against Detroit. Turpin's supposedly a Pro Bowl returner. He's played awful. It's not Sorensen's fault. And for the most part, I think their coverage has been fine. So I don't blame Sorensen. I think he had an awful day as a unit, but I don't think he's a guy that needs to be kicked to the curb. Eberflus, I don't think he will. My prediction is he won't be, barring something crazy. I do think his message is, again, I've said this about 500,000 times. I'm sure you guys are tired of it. I think his message has a good chance of being the right one. But is he the right guy to do it? That's the challenging thing. And here's also the problem. You do get out of the frying pan into the fire. The Bengals, for example, fired Lou Anarumo. He's a veteran defensive coach, not unlike Eberflus in some ways, stylistically. And they got rid of him, and they said, listen, we got to change it up. We got to go younger. We got to go more exciting. So they bring in Al Golden, and it's been a failure for Cincinnati defense up to this point, right? If there's been one defense that's been as bad as Dallas all season, it's been the Bengals. And Louis Anarumo goes to the Colts, and they've actually improved. So, and I understand talent and ability and all of that. Schedule plays a factor into that, of course. But the reality is there's also into the frying, you're in the frying pan into the fire, right? Out of the frying pan into the fire, right? The Cowboys were had some bad DCs over the years. They were not great defensively. For example, in 2019, they regressed. They were really good in 18. They regressed in 19. It's like, okay, we need to bring in Mike Nolan to change things up a little bit. And that was not good. So there is sort of could things get worse? They always could. Even though it seems like they couldn't, it could technically still get worse. That being said, I'm a big continuity guy. And I do think that is a challenge that Dallas has defensively, is that they have none. And I think you got to give Eberflus, unless there's something behind the scenes, I think you got to give him at least 2 seasons. You really do. Because again, he did have in his biggest defense, which is 100% fair, his biggest weapon, Micah Parsons, that he probably came to Dallas to work with and was expecting to have all offseason and all training camp. They did trade him right before the season. And so, it put him in a tough position. They've been dealing with injuries. They've been far from healthy. They're playing they're the youngest secondary in football, the youngest cornerback room in football, right? They've got so much linebacker talent issues. And now I think his usage of the linebackers is a real problem. I think that's been, malpractice on his part, if I'm being totally honest. But it's been a tough situation for any DC. And I don't know if changing it is the right move. I just don't. Now, if there's a guy out there that's just special, sure, maybe. But who is? Who's out there? That's really the question. Ripid Lots writes, Eberflus has to go. He can't scheme versus created teams or against screens. Like, who the F can't defend screens like at all? Well, apparently any team coached by Eberflus. I thought Dallas defended the screen game actually pretty well against the Lions. I think there's a lot of other things they didn't do well, but I thought the screen game they actually played pretty well against. David Moses 884 writes, it seems like for years now under different coordinators, we get off to slow starts and then fight back strong in the second half. Is this just who Dak is? Not pointing blame at him, just noticing a trend. So Dak has always been a rhythm and a vibes guy, to put it another way. I think, it's the knock on Prescott has always been, if he has a slow start to the game, he can't recover. Right, but if things are going well, things are going well. And so if things start going well, things start clicking for him, then he can ride the wave a little bit. I can't think of a time where Dak Prescott, and I'm not picking on you here, David, but where he got off to slow starts and then played better. Maybe 2019, that season kind of comes to mind. But for most of his career, it's been, listen, it's how he starts, it's how he plays. Like he's going to either have a great game or a terrible day, after the first quarter. This year it's been different. And I think that's a lot of Shoddy actually scheming and setting things up for Prescott. I really do. And I think that's a big part of it is Shoddy working with Prescott and setting up the run, setting up the play action, setting up open guys, making a lot of easy throws, easy reads for him, even if it's not productive plays. Just taking some of the burden off Prescott so that way when it's time to make those big throws and those big opportunities, he's kind of in the game. He's in some sort of a rhythm. They've got misdirection going with play action and motion and shifts to, different personnel packages to help him out to make plays against the defense. So I think a big part of that is Shoddy setting things up early to help Prescott later. But they got to start better. I agree 100%. It's a huge flaw with this team right now. Northern Cowboy 8409. Over the past 3 games, Detroit's had 3.5 hours more of rest since they had an early game before Thanksgiving, and we had a late afternoon game. If we lost because we were tired, then what does that say about our conditioning compared to Detroit's? You might not like to say one team wanted the W more, but saying that one team treated it as a must-win more than the other team is saying one team wanted it more. We got mauled in the trenches. I don't understand how our O-line could look so incredibly bad while our receivers weren't getting open. Why are we so bad at tackling? Well, listen, it was a rough day tackling. That's undeniable for sure. But it was against good competition. And listen, DaRon Bland has been a good tackler for the most part all season long. Murray had an awful day. A bunch of guys had an awful day tackling. But it's just, listen, it was a dud day. I think they were worn down. By the way, the Lions were worn down too, right? Again, the Lions surrendered 9 points at halftime, right? And 16 points, I believe, close to the end of the third quarter, and they gave up 2 touchdowns in the fourth as well and should have given up a lot more points. Or they gave up 11 points, I guess, in the fourth quarter. Obviously, there's the pass interference, and that wasn't called. That should have been called on Ferguson, which probably would have led him more points for Dallas. And Dallas was also driving again before that final interception. So, again, it's one of those things where I think both teams were exhausted. I think both defenses were just worn down. It's just the Lions were leading at that point, and it just became a too big of a hill to climb. But as much as the Lions moved the ball up and down the field in the third quarter and especially the fourth quarter against Dallas, Dallas was moving the ball up and down the field against Detroit. And that was being one-dimensional almost at that point. So, again, and that was without CeeDee Lamb, right? So it's one of those things. And, of course, Guyton was out and Thomas was having a terrible day. So despite all of that, the Dallas Cowboys are moving the football up and down the field. So I think both teams were exhausted. I think both teams really were worn out. But I think the Lions, based on how they treated their injuries and their game plans, they saw this as a must-win game. For Dallas, it was clearly just another game to try and implement the system in the process. Tony Cyphers 9239 writes, I was surprised we clawed our way back into this game with the turnovers, defense giving up big plays, sacks on Dak, and support special teams. I wasn't nervous watching it, and the team was calm. They kept battling, but the defensive schemes were bad. I only saw 2 blitzes, and that was in the first half. The times we put our corners in press man, we only rushed 4. It's like the D-line is playing a different scheme than the DBs. It's not passing the eye test. I would rather give up big plays blitzing than playing it safe. No urgency to the defensive game plan. I don't blame the players because the effort is there. The defensive game plan was not aggressive enough, like our defensive coordinator. And that's a fair gripe. I really do think it is a fair gripe. But the question is, are the Cowboys treating these games as just games to implement the system? Or are they actually treating these games they are trying to win, of course, but there is that factor. I do think the lack of blitzing more aggressively is a problem. Now, Eberflus isn't a big blitzer, and that's fine to a certain extent. But boy, oh boy, you gotta throw some tendency busters in there, man. You gotta do something there to at least mix up, even for a drive or two, right? Just to make it look different. I think a big part of it was once he saw that they couldn't cover Gibbs, and they just couldn't cover Gibbs. Linebackers couldn't cover Gibbs. DaRon Bland couldn't cover Gibbs. They're like, okay, we're in trouble. And then Revel had an awful day. And then they couldn't cover Williams. They couldn't cover Amon-Ra St. Brown. So it was just one of those things where I think he just said, okay, we can't cover anybody. Let's just go base and just figure out a way how to survive the sucker and see if our guys can make plays. I don't necessarily agree with that approach, but I think that's what he did. All right, this next comment here is from Ronald Alexander, 5517, special teams. You can blame the defense Eberflus called. You can blame Pickens not rising to the occasion. You can even blame Ferguson for his blunders. You can even blame the play calling in the red zone when your starting position is damn near midfield, what the offensive powered Lions have. That was the ball game. I'm looking at Detroit's returner, and he was running with a purpose. All pro return all year is returning kicks with hesitations. Special teams, that is my 2 cents. Yeah, Turpin's been a massive disappointment. So this was supposed to be a breakout year for Turpin, totally honest, and it's kind of a next step year. Not a whole lot offensively for him, for being totally fair, and special teams wise, I think he had one good return against the Packers to set him up with a good field position. But that's basically all I remember him doing. And it's been a lot of blunders from Turpin, special teams wise. So it's been not a good year. And I agree, their kick coverage team, it's one of those things where they didn't do their defense any favors at all. Defense had an awful day, but boy, oh boy, they just, again, when average starting field position is essentially midfield in today's NFL, I mean, when you play a bend but don't break scheme, which basically every team does to a certain point, the whole thought is, listen, we'll let you drive 50 yards, but we'll stop you in the red zone. Well, the problem is if they start at midfield and drive 50 yards, that's a touchdown. So it's a tough position to be in. One up D808 writes, I honestly feel like our defense really missed Jadeveon Clowney out there. Not that one man makes a big difference, but on our defense, I think he really does. Fowler doesn't run for and rush as good as JD. I'm also worried about our offense on the road early in games. Dak does a lot of checking at the line of scrimmage and can't do it as much on the road. Defense mugged the line a lot against us, and we do the same thing every time to block it up. Sacrifice Javonte closer to the line of block. Why no screen, shift, motion, or even jet sweeps to counter that front? I still love Shoddy, but we must work on that aspect on the road because teams always do it and we don't counter or adjust. Well, I think the challenge there is when you have Lamb and Pickens, who if you blitz and play a man-on-man, I mean, they will eviscerate that. And they did against the Chiefs. They did against Philadelphia. So that's sort of the challenge, right? When you have all-pro receivers and those guys who are great playmakers and they're man-on-man, I mean, you don't let that slide. You have to punish teams. And they have for the most part this season. But sometimes you don't. Sometimes it's not your day, and sometimes Pickens has an off day. And remember, Lamb was destroying them. Like you said, they were blitzing, and Lamb was beating these guys clean. He was going to have 250 yards receiving. Like, it was going to be Lamb's best day of his career. They had no answers for CeeDee Lamb. And I honestly think it'd be a different story after the game if Lamb had been healthy, because they probably would have tried to counter Lamb, and then Pickens would have been one-on-one, then he probably would have had a big play or two. Right? So I think the Lamb injury really made the game plan for Detroit look a lot smarter. And sometimes that just happens. Sometimes you get good injury luck, and you know it's just football. It's the way it is sometimes, but that's just the way it happens. Wonton Soup 888. I love your handle, by the way, as always. I'm curious to why we rotate so much on the defensive side. There's no continuity and just me, but wouldn't it be more difficult to get going as a player with the in and out rather than being out there the majority of snaps? Yeah, mainly, obviously, D-line rotations. I think they're pretty focused on that. I get it to a certain point. Because listen, I think Ezra plays a lot of snaps, but you want to keep him fresh. Obviously, Houston's more of a specialist, so there's certain situations there. I do think from a linebacker position, if you look at, for example, Murray, James, and Wilson rotating in, I just think they look at that and say, listen, we just don't have guys. Like, outside of Overshown, we got three guys who aren't playing good ball right now. And I think that's really the driver here with the rotation, is that they just don't have good players. And I think with Marquise Bell playing a lot at safety, I think they're trying to evaluate who can play safety, because their safety room isn't very good either, if we're being honest. And they're going to have to make some tough decisions in the offseason. So I think there's some evaluation going on there, and I think the reality is they just don't like the performance. But they're just like, listen, we gotta figure out who can play here, because none of these guys are playing well. That's my opinion anyway. But I agree, it can be very confusing sometimes. Stephen Pringle 8313 writes, I think this team needs too much help defensively to pay two receivers $34 million plus. They should try to find out where they have in Mingo and Flanoy as number 2 to CD, because you need to have some serious help on defense. You need a DN to rush the passer. I'd go the free agent route. You need a Mike backer. You need safeties and a cornerback one. Well, listen, I think Deron Bland can be a quality slot guy and a versatile player. And I think that is true. He's had an up and down year, but I do think there's a lot to like with Deron Bland. Cornerback's tough. They really like Revel, which, listen, let him develop, see what happens. And Kalen Carson is a guy that's doing some good things as a sub, and Reddy Stewart's a feisty nickel guy. So, listen, it's a young bunch, but I think cornerback, as much as I'd like a guy there, unless the best in the draft falls to you, my 2 first-round picks, I think they're both defense. I go defensive end for sure, and I probably go linebacker, unless there's a world-class safety falls to you or something like that. I think that's what you do. I really think that's what you do, and I think you just totally invest in this front seven. There is secondary issues for sure, but listen, you can have a great secondary and get dusted. The Chiefs have a phenomenal secondary. It's a strength of their defense. And the Cowboys with Lamb and Pickens eviscerated them. Even the Eagles think they've got a great secondary, and the Cowboys have eviscerated them, right? So, it's one of those things where as much as you really think your secondary, you need to invest a lot in it, and you do. I think it's more important to make sure you've got guys that you trust and versatile guys and, a good depth core. And that's what the Cowboys have, at least right now. I think in terms of top flight issues, to me, it's edge and linebacker, the way things currently sit. All right, that's enough for the comments for today. A little bit longer episode, a little bit of my George Pickens rant, what Richard Sherman has been doing, embarrassing himself. Listen, I think obviously the Cowboys, one of the things is context does matter. The Cowboys did go 2-1, 3-1 post-bye so far, 2-1 through their that tough 3-game stretch. So credit to the Cowboys for doing that. In a similar stretch last year, or in 2023 when they're supposedly a good team, right? When they had to go Seattle, Philly, Buffalo, and Miami in kind of a 4-game stretch there, they went 2-2. So it's, again, that was a good team. And a similar stretch this year, they went 2-1. So, hey, about the same. So you give credit where credit is due there for executing from a high-level macro perspective. But they got some flaws. Obviously, this is a team that, wasn't a championship team this year. We've talked about that a lot. Young players in a lot of pieces. There's going to be some challenges. And I think the team sticking with Pickens and being the support for Pickens, I think is the right move to make 100%. I give credit to the Cowboys leadership group for doing just that. And for Richard Sherman, embarrassing himself publicly, I think is what he did there. And Pickens could have gone a lot harder at him, to be totally honest. But there's going to be a lot of news for the Cowboys, of course, over the upcoming days, and I will be here to bring it to you guys starting tomorrow, of course, with our next show. But until then, I am Nick, and this is Saturday Morning Inspection.